1971, the Jesus People revival was happening primarily, it was all across the country, primarily though on the West Coast, and it was happening here in Spokane. And that summer, the high school ministry that I led down in Eugene, Oregon, decided to hold a weekend retreat on the Oregon coast just as soon as school let out. So this is going to be mid-June. And so at one of our Bible studies, we're talking about this with the students, and I said, who do you want me to invite as a speaker? And one of them piped up and said, Billy Graham. And I said, Billy might be busy that weekend. That was a little that was a big ask, right? And so someone else said, well, Dave Wilkerson. Anybody know who Dave Wilkerson is? The Cross and the Switchblade, Teen Challenge, all right. So, and at that time, Dave was really famous. His book was a bestseller. And I said, well, I'm guessing Dave Wilkerson's book too. But someone suggested some of the other characters from the book. That eventually led us to Spokane. I was not familiar with Spokane, but we ended up in touch with a guy here named Carl Parks and a band called the Wilson McKinley. And we got a picture of the Wilson McKinley. There they are, circa 1971. Does that look like fun? Psychedelic. Anybody here remember the Wilson McKinley? Are there a few of you? Okay, good. A few of you, good, wonderful. So you'll love this. So we mimeographed some flyers. How many of you know what a mimeograph is? All right, if you weren't alive in 71, you have no idea what a mimeograph is, trust me, but this was before copiers, so we mimeographed some flyers. We give them to our students. They start handing them out, not just, to their friends in Eugene, but somehow this kind of got spread across the state. And here's what we put on the flyer. We said, this is a 3-day Jesus retreat at the Oregon coast, only $5, pay at the gate. Does anyone see a problem with this? Yeah, we had absolutely no idea who was coming, how many were coming. Well, it turns out the retreat center on the Oregon coast held 150 people, and 350 showed up at the gate. And to make it even worse, the day before we left, again, no idea who's coming, how many, day before we left, my pastor asked me, said, hey, Joe, who's cooking at your retreat? That's a thing? I said, I'm supposed to get a cook? Well, yeah. He says, do you have any food? And I said, well, I don't have a cook, so I don't think I have any food either. So he put me in his station wagon. We drove to the local pay and pack store in Eugene and bought $200 worth of groceries, filled up the back of his station wagon, and the next day he drove that over to the Oregon coast for us. And so we get there, 350 people show up at the gate, they pay their $5. And the camp people who are a little panicked watching all this happen. And I'm, standing there thinking, oh boy. And about that time, a big yellow school bus rolls in from Spokane. And it's the Jesus People from Spokane that have come down because of Carl Parks and Wilson McKinley. There's about 60 of them on this bus. And 2 young ladies in long skirts, all the way down to their ankles, come off and they ask someone, who's in charge here? And they point at me. And so they come over to me and they say, who's cooking? And I said, they said, you don't have a cook? I said, no, can you cook? And they said, yeah, we cook for the communes in Spokane. We're used to cooking for big groups of people. We'll do it. They said, do you have any food? And I pointed at the station wagon. They looked at that and their eyes went up, right? And so we paid the camp out of the $5 per person, and then we took the rest of the money and gave to these girls and said, here's all we've got. See what you can do. Well, for the next 3 days, those ladies fed 350 of us on the $200 worth of groceries and whatever other little money we gave. It was amazing. It was a miracle. Now, I want to tell you there are 2 important lessons from this story. The first lesson is I'm a disaster. You do not want me planning anything. In fact, when you look around Life Center and you see that things run as smoothly as they do, you know that I've got a whole lot of help. That's right. There are smart people around me making this thing fly. Because if it was up to me, friends, we'd all be starving to death. I'm just telling you. So that was the first lesson is you don't want to trust me. The second one, and really the big lesson, is God shows up. Doesn't he? God shows up. I mean, God showed up at that retreat. In fact, there are people 40-some years later that are still talking about what happened at that retreat. There were miraculous things that happened. And one of those miracles was that God took that meager amount of food we had, and they managed to stretch it and feed all of us. It was an amazing thing. Well, today we're going to read a similar story where Jesus And his disciples are in a remote place with a crowd of thousands of people, and people are hungry. And Jesus turns to the disciples and he says, you feed them. And what happens next, the miraculous feeding of the 5,000, is an amazing story. In fact, it's the only miracle of Jesus that's repeated in all 4 Gospels. And I've included the references to the other places it's included on your outline, Matthew, Mark, and John. And the question is, why is this the only miracle? Why was this so important? Why is this the only miracle that all 4 Gospels made sure it got into their story? And the answer to that, I think, is found in our text. So if you'll open your Bible to Luke chapter 9, page 890. This is the time to get those Bibles out at the end of the aisles, pass them down, make sure everybody's got a Bible in their hands. You want to have a Bible so you can follow along, look at the scriptures. Luke chapter 9, we're going to start at verse 10. Luke chapter 9, page 890. When you get there, whistle. Well, that's sweet. Oh, Rod, wow. Sorry. Oh, we might have started something that we'll regret later. But anyway, here we go. All right, so if you have your Bibles open there, page 890, Luke chapter 9, you notice on the left-hand side of the page, it says Jesus feeds the 5,000. That's the story we're going to read today. But if you look at the verse right above that, look at the verse just above it. This is King Herod wondering who Jesus is. It says, but Herod said, I beheaded John. Who then is this I hear such things about? He's asking about Jesus. Who is Jesus? Then we get this story, the feeding of the 5,000. Then look down, what's the very next heading? It says, Peter declares that Jesus is what? Jesus is the Messiah. So the very next story that happens is Jesus asking his disciples, who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're God's Messiah. So you start with Herod saying, who's Jesus? You end with Peter saying, he's the Messiah. And in between you have this story, the feeding of the 5,000. What was it about this story that convinced the disciples that Jesus was the Messiah? Well, simply put, it's that Jesus did what Moses predicted the Messiah would do. Moses predicted in Deuteronomy 18 that he says, there's coming one after me, he says, a prophet like me. Well, one of the things that Moses was most well known for was leading the people of Israel out of Egypt, right, and into the promised land. And they spent 40 years in the desert. And how did they eat out in the wilderness for those 40 years? What happened? Manna came down from heaven, right? And so Moses, it was God who provided the manna, but the Israelites said, God through Moses provided this food in the wilderness for his people. Well, here's Jesus in a wilderness with a crowd of thousands of people feeding them with seemingly nothing. And that was the miracle that the disciples went, oh my. This is the one that Moses predicted. This is the man that Moses predicted would come who would be our Messiah. And that's why this story was so pivotal and so important in the life of the early church, because the disciples believed this was kind of the linchpin, the final thing, the last shoe that dropped that convinced them Jesus was the Messiah. So let's read it together. Luke chapter 9. We're going to start at verse 10. Here's how the story goes. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. They returned from the mission Jesus sent them on. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away so they can go into the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here. And Jesus replied, you give them something to eat. And they answered, we have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Unless we go and buy food for all this crowd. About 5,000 men were there. If you add in the women and children, it would have been several thousand more. But he said to his disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. The disciples did so, and everyone sat down. Then taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people, and they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. All right, on your outline there, you'll notice we have 5 things we're going to cover real quickly. Before we do that, I'll invite the ushers to come. And if you brought an offering to give or your tithe, once again, thank you so much for your generosity. We often say everything that happens here happens because people like you believe in what we're doing and give. Last weekend, we baptized 54 people here at Life Center. Yeah, that's where the clap. That's awesome. And that brings us, that's 278 people who've been baptized so far this year. 278 lives changed by Jesus. And again, that's made possible in part by your generosity. Thank you so much for believing in what we do and giving to support it. All right, let's dive in here. So number one on your outline, the first thing, the vacation. The vacation. May I ask, how many of you have taken a vacation this summer? Could I see your hands? Let's see the hand nice and high. Okay. How many of you have not taken a vacation this summer? Hold them up nice and high. I'm preaching to you right now. Here it comes. Number one, the vacation. Take a break, but always be ready. Look at verse 10. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done, and then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. All right, so what's going on here is that the disciples have just come back from a mission trip. They're exhilarated, they're exhausted, they've been working hard. And Jesus says it's time for a little break. We're going to withdraw and go off by ourselves into the region of Bethsaida. Now we've got a map here of Bethsaida. You see the Lake of Galilee there, and where the red line ends up there, that's Capernaum in the northwest. And if you just go around a little bit to the right in the northeast, there is Bethsaida. But here's the thing I want you to notice. In between Capernaum and Bethsaida, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a river coming down there. Do you see that river? Anyone know what river that is? It's the Jordan. Yeah, the Jordan comes in from the north and then flows out on the south and goes down to the Dead Sea. So when you crossed over the Jordan, you went to the other side. There you go. You remember this. Yeah, they went to the other side. Remember, the other side was primarily Gentile. Now, Bethsaida was so close to Capernaum, only 4 miles away. It was so close that it was still largely Jewish, but the further you went around the lake, the more Gentile it became. So why did they head toward the region of Bethsaida? Because by going over to the other side, they figured that people probably wouldn't follow them, right? Well, they were mistaken in that. People did follow them, as we'll see in just a moment. So why were they doing this? Why was Jesus taking the disciples and going to the other side, trying to get away, trying to withdraw, it says? Well, the first and most obvious reason is that Jesus is doing some on-the-job training, right? They're coming back, they're reporting in. It's time to get away, to debrief, to unpack what happened, to learn some things. And that kind of training is always best done away from crowds, away from distractions. And so Jesus is going away for a little training. But that's not the only or even the primary thing that was going on. Mark gives us the clue. And so if you'll turn to Mark chapter 6, verse 30. This is page 864. 864. Oh, the first whistle. There we go. Mark 6, verse 30. Now remember, this is Mark's version of the story. And here's what he says. Mark 6, verse 30. So the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, verse 31, then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Would you read that last sentence with me, the words of Jesus there, starting with come with me. Here we go. Let's read it aloud together. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. This is music to tired ears. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. How many of you are tired? Let me see your hands if you're tired. Come on. Okay. Is it because of this sermon? What's going on? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of weariness in our world today, right? We go hard, we push, we drive. And there were a lot of you that raised your hands and said, and I haven't taken a vacation. And Jesus says, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Jesus insists that they leave the crowds behind, that they withdraw, that they recharge, they rest, get refilled. Jesus says, guys, you need a vacation. You need a break. Let's go rest. And what I'm telling you today is so do you. It's true of you too. Every one of us need that. You know, a few years ago, Tim Hansel wrote a book entitled, When I Relax, I Feel Guilty. When I relax, I feel guilty. How many of you identify with that? How many of you feel guilty when you relax? Oh man, that is me. I always have so many things on my to-do list that when I just sit down and try to do nothing, just sit still, it's like my mind is churning, going, oh, you can't rest, you can't stop, you can't relax, you got to keep going, you got stuff to do. When I relax, I feel guilty. I haven't actually read the book. I'm too busy. But I identify with the title, right? I find it hard to relax because I have so much to do. I want to ask you a question. When was the last time you did nothing? When was the last time that you unplugged? When was the last time you just sat on your porch and stared? When was the last time you watched a sunset? Now, I'm very proud to tell you that I just did that. Yeah, just about 9 or 10 days ago, I got back from a 9-day motorcycle adventure with 5 of my buddies. And the 6 of us rode down to southern Utah and on our motorcycles toured 5 national parks. And it was spectacular. I've got one picture from each park. We're just going to run through them real quick. But while you're looking at the pictures, here's what I want to do. This is what I was so proud about. I left my computer at home. Now, you don't understand because I have never done that. I have never gone on vacation and not taken my computer and kept up with my emails. Never done that. I've never unplugged. And so I left at home, and here's what I discovered. This is awesome. There's a thing in my email program. It's called the out of office function. I've never used this before, but I discovered that I could turn this thing on and that anybody who emailed me would get a message telling them that I'm not available, I'm out of the office. And I could actually write what the message said. You want to hear what I wrote? You're going to like it. Here's what I wrote. I said, I am off the grid until August 4. When I return, I will delete all emails received between now and then. I don't want to process over 1,000 emails. So if your email is important, you'll want to resend it to me on or after August 4th. And I did that. I got home, I turned my computer on. There weren't 1,000, there were almost 800, 780 some emails waiting for me. And I clicked on the top one, went down to the bottom one, hit the shift command thing, highlighted all of them, bing, delete, goodbye. It was awesome. When was the last time you unplugged? When was the last time you went off the grid? When was the last time you felt relaxed and rested? Stop feeling guilty about it. Stop feeling guilty about it. Jesus cares about your physical and emotional well-being. Jesus wants you to take a break. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. You know, for some of you, I could just stop right there and be done. Am I right? Yeah, you know, I had someone come up after the service and said, everything you said after that, I didn't even hear. I was thinking about my vacation. That's what I needed to hear. And for some of you, that's what you need to hear today. Stop feeling guilty. Take a break. All right, so Jesus and the boys take a break. They head for the hills. And what happens? Somehow the crowd figures out where they're going and follows them there. This is a bummer, right? They're going away for their break, and when they get there, here's a crowd of thousands of people waiting for them. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of what Pastor Noel told me. This is Lena's dad. Told me that when he and Marty were married, I think we got a picture of them at their wedding. There they are. Noel and Marty on their wedding day. They go away for a honeymoon at the Oregon coast. They wake up the first morning to a knock on the door. It's Marty's parents, and they've come to spend the week with them. That's Marty's parents on the right there, huh? You open the door, oh, Mom and Dad, what are you doing here? Hey, we're going to honeymoon with you. How many of you, that is not your ideal honeymoon? Yeah. I think that's how Jesus and the disciples must have felt when they got to their vacation spot, and here's this crowd waiting for them. But I want you to notice what Jesus did. Verse 11, it says, he welcomed them and spoke to them, and he healed them. Jesus welcomed them, spoke to them, and healed them. I just want to tell you that would not have been my response. I would have said, excuse me, I'm on vacation here, I'm on a break, leave me alone. But Jesus not only thought it was important for his disciples to rest, Jesus thought these people were important too. And he took the time to minister to them. Jesus didn't see these people, and this is real important, Jesus didn't see them as interruptions. Jesus saw them as opportunities to love and serve. Henri Nouwen is one of my favorite authors, and I'm going to read you one of his sentences, one of my favorite sentences that he ever wrote. Here's what he said. He says, "I've always been complaining that my work was constantly interrupted until I slowly discovered that my interruptions were my work." How do you view people that interrupt you? Do you see them as a nuisance? Or do you see them as an opportunity to show God's love and grace and service? Well, that's how Jesus saw people. But that's not necessarily how the disciples saw them. Look at what happened next. Number 2 in your outline, the test. Verse 12. So late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him, and they said, "Oh, Jesus, we're so happy the crowd is here." Oh, wait. That wasn't what they said. Send the crowd away. So basically, the 12 come and say, "Lord, could you get rid of these people, please? We came here for a vacation. We're tired. We want some rest. Can you get rid of these people? Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside, find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here." And Jesus replied, here it comes, "You give them something to eat." You give them something to eat. Now, the disciples' requests seem perfectly reasonable to me, right? You're in the middle of nowhere. It's a remote place. There's nowhere, and it's the end of the day. It's kind of like, "Hey, Lord, it's time to send everybody home." And then Jesus just blows their minds and says, "You meet the need. You feed them. You give them something to eat." What in the world was Jesus thinking? Well, John gives us a clue in his version of the story. You'll turn to John 6. That's page 916 in your Bible. John chapter 6, page 916. We're going to start at verse 5. Some of you are really quick. And some of you sound like birds. I love it. John 6, verse 5, page 916. All right, remember, this is John's version of the story, and here's what it says in verse 5. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Now notice what he says next. It says in verse 6, Jesus asked this only to what? To test him. For Jesus already had in mind what he was going to do. Jesus knew what he was going to do. And this question, this challenge was a test. You say, how is it a test? When Jesus says, "You feed them," how is that a test? Well, remember, these guys have been with Jesus for a couple years now, right? And in the story right before this, Jesus sends them out on mission, and he doesn't send them out empty-handed. It says Jesus gave them power and authority to heal the sick and to cast out demons and to proclaim the kingdom. So these guys come back, and they've got miracle stories of their own, right? Where God has used them to do some amazing things. On top of that, they've been 2 years with Jesus. They've seen him do things like still a storm with a word. They know that Jesus can do anything. And so what I'm telling you is 2 years in school with Jesus, and here comes the pop quiz. You feed them. Now, I want to ask you a question. Do you think that God ever asks you to do something you can't do? I'm getting different answers. In fact, let's take a quick poll. How many of you think, yes, God asked me to do things I can't do? Okay. How many of you think, no, God doesn't ask me to do something I can't do? Okay. How many of you are unwilling to vote because it's a trick question? Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. Okay, the answer is yes. God asks us all the time to do things we can't do. So here's the next question. How many of you think that God asks us to do things that we can't do by ourselves, but that we could do with him? There's the key. And that's what's going on here. The disciples didn't have the resources to feed the crowd. This is the test. When God calls us to do that impossible thing, will you just give up, or will you look to him for help? Will you tackle that seemingly impossible task with him rather than trying to do it on your own? So the disciples didn't have the resources. Jesus knew that when he asked the question, but Jesus, remember, John says, Jesus also knew what he was going to do. And he expected the disciples to know that because he was there, anything could happen. And so really, here's the response I think Jesus was looking for. I'm going to put it up on the screen. I think Jesus was hoping they would say, Lord, we can't do it, but we know you can. And so let's do it together. We can't do it, but we know you can. So let's do it together. What's God asking you to do? What God-sized assignment has he given you that when you first heard it, you went, I can't do that. Forgive this person? Lord, I just don't have it in me. Love this enemy? Don't think I can do it. Tackle this huge problem and fix it? Don't have the resources. What big thing is he asking you to do that makes you say, Lord, I can't? But what if you said, with you, we can? I'll give you a couple for me right now. So I'm working with some buddies of mine, some pastors here in town, and we've kind of put our heads together and said, let's create networks of churches that are committed to multiplying and planting new churches, and we're going to multiply the networks and multiply churches, and our goal in the next 10 years is to plant 400 new churches in Spokane, our region, and across the Pacific Northwest. 400 new churches. Can we do it? No. I'm just telling you right now, I look at that and I go, well, I have no idea how I'm going to do that. Can we do it with him? Yeah, now's the time to get excited. Yeah, we can do it with him, right? We can do it with him, and we're going to. That's what we're getting together. Every time we get together, I want to tell you, we get together, we look at each other and go, ooh. Then we go, Jesus, let's do it. Let's do it. Here's another one. A lot of you know this one, but for the last few years, one of the things, an assignment I believe God's given me is to bring people of different races together in our community. And I believe with all my heart that racial reconciliation is a gospel issue, that Jesus died first to reconcile us to God, but then secondly to reconcile us to each other, and that Jesus wants us to be one. I believe that with all my heart. And here's the deal, friends. Our region has a national reputation for racial intolerance. You're all aware of that, aren't you? Yeah. Around the country, our region has this is not where you want to move if you're a person of color. I want to change that. I want to make this one of the best places in the country to live if you're a person of color, because here we work together for racial peace and righteousness and justice. And I want to make that happen. So here's the deal. I just finished reading, I read a lot of stuff on this. I just finished reading a wonderful book. I recommend it to you. It's called One Blood by John Perkins. I got a picture of John here. John's 87 years old, and he's been at this for his whole life. And here's the subtitle of his book. It's One Blood, and the subtitle is Parting Words to the Church on Race and Love. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. It's this wonderful saint who's given his whole life to serving Jesus and bringing about racial reconciliation. These are his parting words. They're heartfelt, they're warm, they're wonderful. But here's what he says in every chapter. In every single chapter, he says, we can't do it alone, but with God, we can do it. With the Lord's help, we can do it, because it's a gospel issue, and Jesus wants to help us. So I look at this big task, and I sometimes think, can we do it? I think, I can't, but he can, and with him, we're going to make it happen, aren't we? We're going to make it happen. So once again, I just want to be clear. The response I think Jesus was looking for was, Lord, we can't do it. We can't do it. But we've seen you do amazing stuff. We know you can. So let's do it together. Are you ready to say yes to Jesus? Are you ready to say yes to whatever he's asking you, knowing that you can't, but with him, you can? That's the test. Now, unfortunately, the disciples didn't do so well on the test, because they got sidetracked by the obstacle. That's number 3 here, the obstacle. And the obstacle was basically saying, we can't do it. And really, the obstacle was, we just don't have the resources. We don't have the money. We don't have the time. We can't do it. They answered, Lord, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy bread or food for all this crowd. And about 5,000 were there. So here's the thing. Their response wasn't, Lord, we can't, but you can. Let's do it together. Their response was just simply, we can't. We can't. We know from John's version of the story that Philip actually said to him, Lord, it's going to take more than half a year's wages just for everybody in the crowd to have one single bite. That's all. So here's what they're saying. They're saying, Lord, we don't have the money. And if we had the money, like if we had a half year's wages, that would just give everybody one bite. And even if we had the money to give everyone one bite, well, there's no stores around here. Albertsons closed an hour ago. We're out of luck. Now here's the thing. We can't do it, they said. We can't do it. And everything they said was true. They couldn't. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the time, they didn't have the food. They simply couldn't do it. That's a fact. And Mark tells us that when Jesus said to them, you feed them, the disciples protested, of course we can't. And then Jesus follows up with a question. He says, what do you have? How many loaves do you have? Go and see. And I love this. The disciples didn't have any. So these 12 guys they had nothing. So they started going through the crowd asking, hey, you got any food? You got any food? And they found a small boy that had a sack lunch with 5 small loaves and 2 fish in it. Think about this. A crowd of thousands of people, and the only one who thought to bring food was a small boy. I want to hire that kid. I'm just telling you right now. That's the guy I need to help me. So they got this one little boy's sack lunch. And in John's version of the story, again, Andrew's the one who brings that sack lunch to Jesus, and he says, but what's this among so many? It's still not enough. They didn't have enough. They couldn't do it. And I think the point of the obstacle, the point of Jesus saying to us, you feed them and and go see what you have, and we're scurrying around realizing that we don't have much. The whole point of that is to bring us to that spot of self-awareness where I realize I can't do it on my own. I just can't do it on my own. I can't forgive that person by myself. I can't love that person by myself. I can't meet this huge need by myself. I just can't do it. Newsflash, friends, I don't work miracles. I don't heal anybody. I don't save anybody. I don't fix anybody. I can't fix your marriage. I can't fix your life. I happen to know who can. And I can point you to him. And that's what this is designed to do. The whole point here, when Jesus says, you feed them, and they're looking at each other going, well, we don't have anything, we'll go find out what you have. They come back with, here's what we got. Jesus says, good. Now you figured out you can't do it. And you brought what you have to me. Now we can start. Now we can start. That's where things start, when we realize that we can't do it on our own, that we're not smart enough, talented enough, rich enough, whatever enough it is, that we're not enough, but he is. And we bring it to Jesus. And this is the solution. Number 4, the solution is bring it to Jesus. Bring it to me, Jesus says. Matthew tells us in his version of this story, if you want to turn to Matthew 14, it's page 840. Matthew 14, verse 840. Matthew adds a little detail that's only in his version of the story. It's a really interesting detail. Before Jesus has the people sit down in small groups, Matthew tells us that Jesus did this. Verse 17, Matthew 14, verse 17. We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. And Jesus said, bring them here to me. What do you have? Bring it to me. Here's the solution. Realize that you don't have enough, but bring what you have to Jesus. Realize that you don't have enough, but bring what you have to Jesus. When you don't have the resources, you simply bring what you have to Jesus and let him multiply what you have. When it's not enough, bring it to Jesus and let him do big things with it. So one of my favorite stories in the Bible is found in Exodus chapter 3. It's on page 49. I'm not going to read it, but if you want to turn there and just follow along, make sure I'm telling you the truth. Here's how it goes. It's about Moses, when God called Moses to go bring the Israelites out of Egypt. Remember that God got Moses' attention by using what? A burning bush, a bush that was on fire but wasn't being consumed. And so Moses is tending the sheep in the backside of the desert, sees this burning bush, goes over, has this encounter with God. God calls him to go to Egypt and bring the Israelites out of slavery into the promised land. And Moses makes excuse after excuse after excuse. So here's the first excuse. Moses says, who am I? I mean, basically what he says is, God, I'm a nobody. I've got no power, I've got no authority, I've got no money. Who am I to do this great task? And I love God's answer. God's answer was, I will be with you. What was God saying? He said, Moses, doesn't matter who you are, because it's really not about you, it's about me. I'm the one who's going to, you're not going to do it, Moses. I'm going to do it. Who am I? I will be with you. Well, then Moses goes to the next objection. His next question is, well, who are you? Right? I'm going to go down there and tell him that the Lord saying, well, who's the Lord? And this is that beautiful passage where God says, tell them that I am who I am. Tell them that I am sent you. And then Moses brings up the next thing. He says, well, what if they don't believe me, right? I mean, again, who am I? I am, but what if they don't believe me? And then I love this part. God says, What's in your hand? What's that in your hand, Moses? Now, what was in Moses' hand? A staff. Y'all know what a staff is? What's a staff? It's a stick. Think about this. What if they don't believe me? And God says, what do you got, Moses? I got a stick, Lord. I got a stick. What's God say? Throw it down. What's in your hand? It's a stick. Throw it down. Moses throws it down, and it turns into a snake. And then God says, pick it back up. At that point, I'm Moses. I'm saying, you turn it back into a stick, then I'll pick it up. So Moses picks it up, goes back into a stick, so he's got a stick again. But something's different about the stick. From this point on, that stick has a name. You know what it's called in the Bible? It's called the staff of God. The staff of God. This is the staff that Moses uses to strike the Nile River and it turns to blood. This is the staff that he used in almost every one of the 10 plagues in Egypt. This is the staff that Moses lifted and the Red Sea parted and the Israelites went through on dry ground. This is the staff that Moses held up in the battle against the Amalekites and Israel won a great victory. This is the staff of God. What's in your hand, Moses? It's just a stick, Lord. Why don't you give it to me and I'll give it back to you as the staff of God. What's in your hand? What do you have? Right now you might be thinking, not much. Just a stick. 5 small loaves, 2 little fish. It's not much. But when you bring it to Jesus, he can do amazing things with it. What do you have? Bring it to Jesus. One example of this right now in my life is, I mentioned this a few weeks ago, that in Western Kenya, where we're working, we've identified in the region that we work in, we've identified 42 schools, elementary and secondary schools, that do not have clean drinking water. 15,000 students that don't have clean drinking water at school. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine going to school and there's no clean water? There's also not bathrooms, no sanitary facilities. And we decided we want to change that. And so smarter people than me went to work on it. Remember the first lesson from that first story? Yeah. You don't want to put me in charge of those details. So smarter people went to work on that, and they figured out that's going to cost us $360,000. That's less than $9,000 a school. That's less than $25,000 a student. But still, it's $360,000. Now, I don't have $360,000. Do you? If you have $360,000, will you come see me after the service? I want to talk to you. But here's what we're doing. We're saying that's what it's going to cost us to do this. Do we have that? The answer is no, we don't. We've got a stick. We've got 5 loaves and 2 fish. But we're bringing what we have to Jesus. And we believe that, yeah, can I do it? No, I can't. Can we do it with him? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And I believe that if we start with what we have and bring that to Jesus, that he will multiply it. And friends, I'm going to tell you that within the year, I'm going to get to stand up and tell you that there are 15,000 students in Western Kenya that have clean drinking water and bathrooms because God did something. I'm just telling you that in Jesus' hands, Jesus, bring it to me, and in Jesus' hands, our little becomes more than enough. And that's the last point, number 5. Last thing here. The outcome, it was more than enough. Look at verse 17. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Notice the first 3 words, they all ate. Who ate? All of them. And what was all of them? Like thousands of people ate from this little sack lunch. Thousands of people. All of them ate. And then notice the next words. They not only all ate, but they were all satisfied. I looked up that word satisfied. That word satisfied means full. You ever eaten till you were full? You've all done that, haven't you? Yeah. So anybody here ever go to a buffet? Can I see your hands if you ever go to a buffet? Come on. Okay, yeah. I went to a buffet on our motorcycle trip. We just did one buffet. I try to stay away from buffets. And here's why. Because when I pay money at an all-you-can-eat place, I feel compelled to eat all I can. It's like I paid that money, I have to get my money's worth. Now that's really stupid because like this buffet we went to, it was $18 for the buffet, for a dinner buffet, and it was a beautiful big buffet. You know, you could go someplace, pay $18 and eat a reasonable dinner, right? For 18 bucks. And then you'd say, I got my money's worth, it was a reasonable dinner. But for some reason, I go to an all-you-can-eat thing, I pay 18 bucks, I think I got to eat 50 bucks worth of food because it's all you can eat. I've got to get, so at this beautiful buffet we went to, I mean, the first time through, please don't tell my wife she's a vegan, but I took the first plate, it was all meat. I just went straight for the meat. Anybody, you know what I'm talking about? Oh, yeah. Oh, a whole bunch of you go straight for the meat. Filled up the plate with meat. I want to just tell you, I ate that plate of meat, and I was full. I mean, I could have quit right then. But this was all you can eat. I'm not going to quit. So I go get a second plate, and this time I go through the salad bar. Beautiful salad bar, lots of different. I heaped that thing up with salads. It was fabulous. I finished the salads. Oh, now I'm beyond full. You know what I'm talking about? I'm starting to hurt a little bit. But I paid 18 bucks, and it's all you can eat. So I got a third plate. And you know where I went for the third plate? Desserts, yes. They had an awesome dessert bar. It was incredible. So I polished off that third plate, and I got to tell you, just tell me in one word what I was feeling at that moment. Yeah, I heard lots of words there. Yeah, I was really uncomfortable. I'm just going to say that. And I leaned back in my chair, and I asked the question I always ask at that moment, why? Why did I do that? I'm uncomfortable. Why did I do it? Hey, here's what I want to tell you. This was a Jesus buffet. Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, started breaking it. The people ate. They were filled. They were satisfied. I think there were people kicking back going, oh, why did I do that? Oh, man, I ate so much. Jesus took the little, turned it into more than enough. Not only was everyone satisfied, but it says they picked up 12 basketfuls of pieces. What's the significance of the 12? 12 disciples, right? Remember, these 12 guys showed up at this party. What did they have? Nothing. They left. What did they have? They all had a big basket full of leftovers. You ever go to someone's house for dinner, you show up with nothing, go home with the leftovers? Woo! That's what's going on here. This was really cool. In Jesus' hands, their little was more than enough. When we surrender our shortage to Jesus, He makes it more than enough to meet the need. You know, so often, friends, we live with a scarcity mentality. You know what I mean by that? There's not enough. There's not enough. There's not enough time. There's not enough energy. There's not enough money. There's not enough, whatever it is. There's not enough. But with Jesus, we can cast off that fear and begin to live with an abundance mentality that says, I don't have much, but Jesus can take my little and turn it into more than enough. You know, the church fathers, I love this. The church fathers believe that this story encouraged generosity with strangers because we believe that God will always provide. We can be generous because God will always provide. And I'll just finish with a story that illustrates this. And this just happened a couple months ago. It's a really cool story. Down in El Paso, Texas, Juarez, Mexico, they're right across the Rio Grande from each other. There's a ministry down there called the Lord's Ranch. It's a Catholic ministry. It's led by a charismatic priest named Father Rick Thomas. And over the years, I've followed their ministry for a number of years. And over the years, starting clear back in the 1980s, they've seen a number of these kinds of multiplied miracles. For example, they've gone into the dump at Juarez to feed the people who live in the dump. They've taken in food for 100, and 400 show up. And they have enough to feed all 400 and tons left over. I mean, it's a miracle. And so here's one that just happened 2 months ago. It's really cool. Right after Easter, the ministry closes down all of its centers, all of its feeding centers for a week to give all the hundreds of volunteers. Remember point number 1? Take a vacation. So here, everyone gets a break. Take a vacation. Go rest. Well, this year, when they did that, somehow the schedulers got a little fouled up. And the people who do the buying and restock the fridges didn't do it. And so they came back from their week off, and they come back on a Saturday, and on every Saturday, they feed all the children that come in for the catechism and the adult volunteers that work with them. Well, they came back, and they opened, there's nothing in the fridge, they opened the cupboards. Here's what they found. They found 1 loaf of bread. That was it, 1 loaf of bread. Ramona, who coordinates this, she scrounged around and found 2 donated packages of tortillas. That's it. That's all they had. 1 loaf of bread, 2 packages of tortillas. The cooks were worried. And so at that point, Esmeralda spoke up. Esmeralda was one of the volunteers who helped the cooks. And she said, well, I have some potatoes left from the groceries I received 2 weeks ago. So she's one of the ladies who gets free food from this service. And she had a few potatoes left, and then she said, and yesterday I cooked a small pot of beans. I have a few left. She said, I want to go get them and bring them. And Ramona, again, the coordinator, really wasn't excited about this because Esmeralda was so poor. She was a single mom raising 4 kids. Here's a picture of her with 3 of those kids. And Ramona thought, we can't take her food. But then Ramona remembered this story. The story of Jesus taking this small boy's sack lunch, multiplying it and feeding people. And so Esmeralda was so excited and happy, she went and got the stuff, brought it back to share. Someone else went to a tiny corner store, bought a few packages of chorizo. Y'all know what chorizo is? Spicy sausage. And they put those with this little offering of beans and potatoes, 1 loaf of bread, 2 packs of tortillas. That's all they had. And with these meager supplies, the cooks went to work. Well, lunch came and went. Everyone was fed. And Ramona didn't eat. The leader didn't eat because she knew there wouldn't be enough food. And so she went in afterwards, after everything was done. She asked the cooks how it went, and they said, it was amazing. They said, we not only fed everyone, but she said, everyone got their fill. People came back for seconds and thirds. People ate till they were full. And they said, and there's still food left over, so you can eat too, Ramona. And when they added it up, they'd fed 123 children and 58 adults with those very meager little supplies. They said, no way that it could have stretched that far unless God acted. And here's what I love about that. You've got a lady, Esmeralda, single mom with 4 little kids, who's living on handouts herself, who said, I've got a few potatoes and a little pot of beans. And I'll bring the little I have and trust that God will make it enough. And he did. What do you have? What's in your hand? If you bring it to Jesus, it's more than enough.